just in case you guys have forgotten how to install a library to your PyCharm, we'll set that up. So just remember, you go to settings, you go into your project, and then your project interpreter. You can see all the packages that are installed. If you click this plus over here, then you can search for PyQt5, for example, and then install that. Click it, install package. Okay. If you need any more help on anything like that, make sure you ask for help in the chat, and Calvin can get started. And then just to make sure, can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. Awesome. So today we're going to be building just a loan calculator, which will take in two values, which are the starting loan amount and the loan interest rate. And then after that, we will calculate every year after that how much the loan will increase by, okay? And we're going to do that by setting up a Qt5 layout and widget and everything. So if we start with this startup code, you can tell that we are building the app, right? We're setting the window equal to this class loan calculator, and we're going to define the class. And then it's showing the window and executing this app for us to run, okay? So how we define the class is pretty simple, but the first thing we need to do is make sure it inherits from Q widget. So if we do class loan calculator, how do we make it inherit from Q widget? Anyone can answer. Yeah, so Sarah says, and Kayla says, that's exactly right. Inside of parentheses right here, we're going to put Q widget, okay? So anything you want the class to inherit from, you put right inside of those parentheses. All right, and then we'll use this colon to start it, and then we'll do an init method. And then inside of our instructions, it says, write an init method that initializes the Q widget part of the class. So does anyone know what that means? What is the Q widget part of the class? Yeah, exactly. So the super class that we're inheriting from is this Q widget, right? That's why we put that inside the parentheses. And so to initialize that, we have to call the super class's init method. And you guys did this in your Plants vs. Zombies question, and in your Plants vs. Zombies game that you built, where you had your subclasses and you called the super classes to initialize. Now, do you guys remember how to do that? This is question 1 on your quiz for the lab. What line of code do we need to add to initialize that super class? Yeah, that's exactly right. So Kara and Sarah have it exactly right. So we're going to do super and then dot init right there. Okay, and what that will do, we'll call that init method for the Q widget and set up any of its default values in whatever it needs to do for us. Okay, does anyone have any questions on super classes and inits? Okay, perfect. So your question 1 for the lab, the answer should be this line right here, this super.init. Okay. So the goal of our loan calculator is to make it so that we can have initial amount of loan and then also have a percent or a rate that it grows by each year. And then we're going to calculate that every second. We're going to change the value and increase the year. So we're to start out with, we want to add some instance variables that are the loan amounts, the initial loan amount, the year itself, and the interest rate. Okay. So does anybody have any questions on what instance variables are and how to define them? Okay. So instance variables hopefully should be pretty familiar. Yeah, exactly. So an instance variable is when you call the self and assign it to a variable, right? So for example, an instance variable for the loan amount, we're going to start out with, we do self.loan amount. Let's see if I remember how to spell loan. Okay. And then you set that equal to, and we're going to start this equal to 1000.0. Okay. Now, self.loan amount, this is the instance variable. Okay. And this is the value that the variable has. Okay. And then when we call self.loan amount anywhere else inside the class, right, we will get that value back. And if we change it, it'll change that for the entire object, right? Now, the cool thing about instance variables is that they're specific to the instance, right, of that object. So for example, right down here where we have window equals loan calculator, this is where we're creating the instance of the loan calculator. If we were to create a new loan calculator, it could have its own value for the loan amount, right? Just like your plants and zombies had their own health amounts that you could change so that they would die independent of one another. Okay, so then we're also going to add values for year and interest rate. And then equal to 0.06. So that's a 6% rate. Okay. And then what we're going to see is pretty common inside these PyQt function is that we're going to call a self.setupUI method from our init. Okay. So if you guys recall, the init method is used to initialize, right, or set up this object. And in general, inside the init method, we want to keep it simple and start out by just defining the instance variables. And then, for example, if we want to do more things to set up the object, we can call these helper methods like this setup UI method to set up the different layouts and queue widgets that go inside of the loan calculator. Okay, so for most of your projects that deal with PyQt, this is the layout you're going to follow. Okay, so we'll define the setup UI method. All right, and we're going to add these 2 lines of code. Okay. And if you have any questions, feel free to stop me or put it in the chat. Okay. So these 2 lines of code create a layout, right? This is a QV box layout, which means this V stands for vertical, right? So it will start from the top, and then each new widget we add will just will be placed below the one that's next. Okay. So the next thing what we'll do is we'll create a Q label. And we'll start it to, let's call it loan label. And we'll initialize it, okay? And we want it to start out with starting loan amount Okay. And we're going to learn just a little bit by reading from this guide right here that the professor has linked. So I want you to open up this link, and then you can use Control F to find Q label. So you'll see he's created a bunch of widgets, and then he's got a description on all of them. So if we keep on searching, we can find Q label right here, and he'll tell us how to initialize these Q labels, okay? So I want you guys to read through this by Q labels, and then you can answer question 2 on the lab quiz. And when you're ready, you can put in the chat what you think should go on this left side or this right side to initialize our Q label with the right value. So we want it to say starting loan amount. So when you're ready, go ahead and put in the chat what you think the right answer is for question 2 on the lab quiz. Yeah, so Sarah says that'd be the first option there, which is Q label. So we put over here, Q label equals starting loan amount. Does anyone disagree with her? Okay, seems like everyone agrees then. So this, I think this is the right answer. And if you look, just in this tutorial that we were looking at, it says right here, you can set the text by passing in as a string as you create it, right? So basically, we're just creating the same line of code again, just Q label hello, right? But instead of hello, we're giving it this starting loan amount over here, okay? What you can imagine is that there's an init method with one parameter, which is the text, or set the starting text value, and then when you call that init, you're setting an instance variable for the label equal to the string that you gave it, okay? So as we move on, then we're going to add a place for the user to type in a loan amount. So this label is just gonna be just that string that the user can see to kind of give direction, right? And then we want them to be able to actually type in the loan amount that they want, okay? And we're going to use what's called a Q line edit widget. So we can call it self.loan entry. We can set this equal to a Q line edit, okay? And then we're going to use the set text method, okay, to set the value inside this QLine edit, okay? So to do that, we'll call self.loanEntry. Then we'll do dot set text, okay? And we're gonna set it equal to initial value, okay? So this should be 1,000 based on what we set our initial loan amount to. And we'll be editing this as we go forward. Okay. If we want, we can read about this QLine edit in our tutorial above. So if we search for QLine edit, we can get a brief description on it and an example of how it's used. So you can see, you can set the max length if you want, so that they can only set a certain number of characters inside it. You can also set placeholder text. So for example, this would just give a prompt. You know, you can imagine in a lot of different websites that you might use, it'll, you know, tell you to put email or password inside certain areas, but as soon as you click on it, then that placeholder text disappears. So that's kind of what that idea is. And the set text will actually just set an initial value for it, okay? So this QLine edit just gives a brief description right here if you guys are interested in it. And then we can move on, okay? So we have the set text, we have our loan entry, and we have our loan label. Now, the next thing that we need to do is add these to the layout. So it's pretty simple to add to the layout. Does anyone want to help us out as a lab? How do you add widgets to your layout? Yeah, so pretty much. So we have this layout object that we created, right? And we're just going to do layout dot add widget, right? And inside it, we have to give it a Q widget. And so what we're going to do, we'll give it the two widgets that we have, which are self.loan label. And then we can copy this line of code and do it again, but also give it loan entry. Okay, so if you're ever working on some code and you've created your widgets and then you run your program and the widgets don't show up, make sure you've added the widgets to the layout. Otherwise, they're not going to show up. So if we run our code now, should get just this little tiny text box that has enough room for our starting loan amount. So that's our widget. That's our self.loan label. And then also has this QLine edit for 1,000. We can type in it whatever we want. Okay. And that's where we should be at right now. So does anybody have any questions about PyQt, about how to get it work? If you're not running it or you're getting an error, go ahead and message Calvin directly and he should be able to help you get your code working, okay? Sweet. So the next thing we want to do is answer question 3. So if you haven't answered question 3, the question 3 is asking about where the QLine edit shows up relative to the Q label. So if we run it, I'll just show you again. This is our label, this is our edit. So the edit appears below the QLine label. And why do you guys think that is? Go ahead and answer in the chat. Yeah, so Sarah says because the order you added them in the layout, and that's exactly right. But why do you think it didn't, for example, add the queue lane edit just to the right of it? Why did it add it below? Is yeah, yeah, exactly. So remember how we did this QV box layout that makes it vertical? Yeah. So Kayla and Sarah are right on the right track. So that means that things will add top to bottom, right? And I believe there's a QH box layout, right? So for example, if we had done it like that, you can see that it starts to the right of it. Okay, so H is for horizontal, V is for vertical. And we're gonna leave it at vertical, but I just wanted you guys to see that. So remember, as you add things to your layout, um, it's all based on how you have your layouts set up. Okay, so for example, for your final project, you're going to have multiple layouts. You'll have some of them be vertical, some of them be horizontal, and the order that you add things to your layouts is very important as to where PyQt will place them on your screen. Okay, all right. So we're going to make this a little bit more interesting. We want to make it so that we can actually do something with these values that we have. Okay. Um, so what we're going to do is add an interest rate label that says interest rate in percentage, and then also an interest rate entry queue line edit with initial value of 6, okay, 6.0. So that's this right here. And I want you guys to write that code yourself and then run it to make sure it looks, basically it should look the same as this, except for it should have this repeated with different values, right? So it should say this interest rate in percentage and then a value of 6.0 inside the next queue line edit box, okay? So go ahead and take some time to write that. And then when you're done, we can have someone volunteer their code for us to use in the chat. All right, so if anyone has functioning code, you can go ahead and put that in the chat for everyone to use. Or if you have any questions on how to make it work, you can also ask those. All right, so we're going to create two new instance variables, right? So the first one will be self dot loan. It's interest rate label, actually. Okay. And this one's going to be a Q label, right? And we're starting it with this line right here, interest rate in percent, with the colon. Okay. And then we also want to create a interest rate entry. And what is this going to be? Someone help me out with this side of the line. It's going to be a Q line edit, right? And then we need to set the text equal to 6 to begin with. Right. So very similar to what we just barely did with the loan entry and loan entry amount. How can we do that for this rate, interest rate entry? Yeah, so that's on the right track. Do Q line edit, and she suggests that we put a 6 in there. We can try that. I'm not sure if that works with Q line edits. So the next thing that we would have to do is add these widgets to our layout and see if it works. Okay, so make sure you add these to the layout after the initial ones that we had, right? So we're going to do self.loan. What is it called? Or interest rate. That's what it was. Interest rate label. And then interest rate entry right here. Okay. So if we run it, it works. So we get interest rate in percentage, right? With the 6 to begin with. Okay. Now, the other option we could do, which could also work, is if we just do entry. Sorry. We can do that set text again that we did before, right? Which would follow the example we did here. So you can put that 6 inside here with to initialize it with that value, or we can use this set text method to set it equal to 6. Okay, so whatever your preference is, both work. So now that we have all the things in place for div values, we're going to want to actually start calculating the loan amounts. Okay, so first we're going to add a Q label and call it the result label. Okay, so we'll do that inside of our setup. We'll make it a Q label. And we're going to set it, we want to start it out as blank, right? Because until we actually have the right information we want, we don't want to actually calculate anything or display any results. Okay, we'll add it to the layout. Okay, and then we're going to add this code the professor gave us, which is going to set the initial loan amount. Okay. So if we look at this method, this initialize loan, it takes our instance variable year, remember we said this year instance variable, and it sets it equal to 0. And then it takes this loan amount by getting the loan entry text, okay, and it converts it to a float, which basically means it's taking that string and turning it into a number, right? So we have to hope that the user inputs some sort of valid number and not any kind of, alphabetical word, right? And then it also does the same thing for the interest rate by getting that entry and getting the text. And then it's going to divide it by 100 because we're using a percentage. And then the last thing it's going to do is it's going to set the text of this result label that we just had, okay? And it's going to format it, when we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second, okay? So what we need to do is we need to connect this initialize loan method to our Q-line edits, right? So what we want to have is that when you edit one of those lines, with that's the interest rate or the loan amount, and then you press enter, it'll call this method and display your initial loan values, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna add these 2 lines that he provides in the lab for us. Okay. And let's see. Yeah, so we gotta make sure those are right values, okay? So basically what's gonna happen is it's taking this line edit and it's using its editing finished value, which basically allows you to connect a function to it so that when you're done editing and you click enter, then it will call this initialize loan and display the values, okay? So if we run this to begin with, you'll see where we should have that result label, it's initially blank. But as soon as you press enter, then it will start to display the value. And you can see it's directly linked to this right here. So we have this year, and then we have this 0, and then we have loan and some fancy stuff, okay? So we get year, 0, and then loan, and we actually end up getting this loan amount that's up here, okay? And to explain what's happening right here, because this is a string format, you see how it's calling this dot format on this string. We're going to read a little bit. So if you pull up this link, it has a little bit on string format. And we're going to search for this section, how string format works. Okay. And if you have any questions, if you're confused about what's happening, feel free to ask in the chat. Let me know what's up. So if you notice, we're going to follow, this is following positional arguments, okay? So basically, format reads the type of arguments passed to it and formats it according to the format codes, okay? And we're going to learn about what that means exactly. So basically, you can have a string, and inside your string, you can use these curly braces, just like we have right here, to define different variables that you want to enter into your code, okay? So right here, we have 0, okay? And you'll see how this is highlighted in green, and it's got this arrow over to Adam, right? So basically what will happen is that this format right here will allow you to give it variables, right? As many variables as you want. And starting at 0, it will replace anything that you have inside these curly braces with these variables, okay? So we wanted to place the year value here. So we put self.year inside of this format. And then we want to place the loan value over here. So we put a 1, and we have self.loan amount as the second variable in our format. Okay. So you can see in the diagram again, we have this arrow pointing to this first variable and another one pointing to this second. Okay. So now, so this explains a little bit about how those curly braces work. Okay. But we're going to focus for a second on this weird notation we have right here with this 1:10.2f. Okay. So this is the same idea as this 230.236. And so let's break it down. So this first thing we have is this f right on the end. That means that it's a floating point. That means it's a decimal value, right? Which gives us our, 0.236 in this case, or 0.0 in our loan amount case, okay? The next part, so the part before the period, which is, in our case, is a 10, and the 9 in this example, this specifies the minimum width or padding. So that means that's the number of spaces that we have. So if you notice up here, you can see that this actually has a space for 9 including this period, right? So 9 values are characters, okay? And even though this number isn't 9 characters long, it adds 2 empty blank spaces. And if we look at our example, you'll see how we have this little bit of extra space before this 1000. That's because ours is padded to 10. So even though this 1000.00 is not quite 10 in length, we have a little bit of extra space for if the number grows. Okay. Then the last thing is, let's see, this 0.2. Okay. So in this example, it has 0.3, but that just means how many values you want after the decimal place, and it will round up from there. So this one specified 0.3, and it gave it a decimal of 4. So then it rounded that 346 into 35. Okay, and then ours, for example, has 2. So even though we had our initial value was 1000.0, we got, oh, let's see, rerunning it. It added this 0.00 on the end because we specified that we wanted 2 decimal places. Okay. So does anyone have any questions about how that string format works? There's a lot of different things happening right there, but you just have to break them down one at a time. So to answer question 4 on your quiz, it's asking about this 10 portion right here. And I want someone to put in the chat, what does that 10 mean in this part of the code? Yeah, exactly. So we have a minimum of 10 spaces that this number will play out. Okay, so that means that we have 10 spaces at least this number will take. Okay, and what does that mean for our loan right here? So for example, let's just change this. Let's say we change this to 1, right? See how there's all this extra space in between this loan colon and our number? That's what those extra spaces are, right? So you imagine we had like 7 spaces in front of it, okay? Because this is, I guess 6, because this is only 4 with the decimal. Okay. So this padding, if we changed it, for example, we could change it to 1. We'd have to stop it, rerun it. And change it to 1. See how much closer that 1.00 is? So the idea with this padding here is we make it so that things are consistent in our layout. And as you add more widgets to your layouts, it'll become useful to make sure that things are spaced accordingly and as you want them to, right? Because you can imagine you want something to the right of your loan and you want it to always be in the same spot and you don't want it to keep on shifting depending on how long your loan amount is. Okay, hopefully that makes sense for everyone. So the final thing that we want to do is we want to make it so that we can calculate the year based on, or the loan amount based on the year. And we'll use a Q timer to keep on incrementing the year. So every second we add a new year and we get a new value, okay? So the professor provided us with, Professor Johnson gave us this code, which is this method for calculating the next year. So what it does is it takes the loan amount, does some math on it to get the new value. It increments the year and then it resets that label based on the new year and new loan amount. Okay. What we want to do is to add a timer such that the method is called every second, starting when either the Q line edit has return pressed in it. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is make a Q timer in setup UI. Okay. So go ahead and help me out in the chat. How can we add a Q timer? Or I guess, how can we start? How can we create a Q timer? Yeah, good job. So we'll create an instance variable, right? Call it timer. And then to create a Q timer, we just have to call its init method, right? By using the class name and these parentheses, right? So we set that timer. All right, the next thing we need to do is connect the timer timeout to the calculate next year method, right? So remember, the timer timeout means that at every interval that you give it, it will call that method when it times out. So for example, we want ours to call calculate next year every second. So first thing we need to do is to connect the timer timeout. Okay, so if you remember, you do self.timer dot time out. Let's see if I remember. I'm just gonna look on the cheat sheet over here, but it's a little bit interesting, right? So we have the self.timer.timeout. Okay. And then we want to do .connect. Okay. And then for this connect, we give it the method that we want it to call. Okay. And we connect it like that. So it's the same kind of idea as what we had for this editing finished, except for with our timeout, okay, for the timer. And remember, we never want to put these parentheses on the end here in this connect method, right? We want to make sure we keep it without parentheses. So it calls the method. Okay. The last thing that we want to do is start the timer, but we don't want to start it until a value has been entered in the loan amount or the interest box. Okay. So how do you think we can do that? And this is question 5 on your quiz. Where is a good place to put that timer? Or a good place to start the timer? Yeah, so Eric says inside the initialize loan method, and um, that's right. So why would you think that is? Why did you say that? Yeah, so this initialize loan method is what makes sure we set the year to the right amount, and we're getting these loan amounts based on what they entered for us, right? Converting them into floats. And we know that the user has given us an input when this initialize loan method has been called, right? So this is the spot where we want to put it because it's kind of the one that's going to initialize not only the loan values, but also make sure we have all of the right information so we can calculate the loans, right? So the way to start it is we just do self.timer.start, and then we give it the number of milliseconds we want between each time it runs that function that it's connected to, right? Or this method. So this calculate next year is going to get called every 1,000 milliseconds or at once every second. So in our final example, if you run your code and you press enter, it should start out with year 1, then it should move to year 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, and each time the loan amount is increasing by our percent. Okay, so then what should happen is if you added these values, for example, if we make it 3 instead, it'll grow a little bit less and it restarts from 0. Okay, so hopefully this is working for everyone. If you need help, there's the code at the bottom of the lab. This is working finished code for everyone. You should be able to answer all the quiz questions based on the lab that we just did. And if you have any questions, we can hang out for a couple more minutes to answer any questions anyone has. And thanks for showing up and helping out.